Welcome, everybody. My name is Richard Hynson, and I'm music director of the Bel Canto Chorus in Milwaukee, Wisconsin of the USA. And I introduce myself that way because I'm actually welcoming a guest, Paul Mealor, world-renowned composer who is in Scotland, in Edinburgh. Is that correct?
Aberdeen, actually. Yes.
Aberdeen, excuse me. At the University of Aberdeen, of course, is where you teach composition. Uh, but people like me know you through your many extraordinary works. And of course, you are known around the world because of your Ubi Caritas and then the many works you wrote for the Queen's Jubilee. So you have that popular side to your music, but then you also have this extraordinarily profound contemplative side. And so this brings us to why I'm asking you to converse with me today, because Bel Canto is performing your extraordinary Stabat Mater this coming weekend. And so I'd like us to talk to each other a little bit about this piece so that people can get a sense of its context and maybe even some thoughts of you about how you composed it. So first off, would you share with us a little bit about how you became a composer, how you decided to start putting notes on the page?
Okay. Oh, thank you, Richard. It's lovely to be with you. And as people can see, for the one day of the year in Scotland, we have sunshine. It's today, so it's just behind me. Yes, I started writing music very early. I was born in Wales, a small country on the west coast of Great Britain, and I had a religious experience, a spiritual experience. I was 9 and I couldn't swim, and I fell into a river. The river is called Dimlligwy in Welsh, and I was drowning. And as I was drowning, I realised there's nothing I could do, and so I surrendered to death. And when I did that, most amazing warmth came over me that I've never felt since, and it really felt not a bad place to be going. Luckily, I didn't go there, and I was dragged out and resuscitated. I was obviously unconscious, and I said then to my dad, I really want to find out what that warmth is. What is it? And the only place we could think of going to was the cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral, in the city where I lived, St Asaph. And so we arranged a meeting with the dean, and as I went in for this meeting at the age of 9, the choir was rehearsing. Just by chance, they were rehearsing John Rutter's What Sweeter Music, and CC the Word is Incarnate by Orlando Gibbons. Remain two of my absolute favourite pieces. And when I got to speak to the dean, a wonderful man, I said, I don't think I need to speak to you now. I've got all my answers. I mean, it's the choir, that's that warmth that I'm after. And so I joined as a boy chorister, and so I did. It's quite a common story in this country, is that you sing the offices of the day every day, and as your voice changes, I then sang alto, and then sang tenor, then sang bass, and eventually I landed back at tenor. So I sang all of the parts and the daily repertoire, and of course it makes you quite a competent musician because you're performing all the time, and so that's how I started. When I was in the choir, I thought, I'd like to write. I think I could do this. So I started doing little hymns and arrangements and things as a kid, and of course they were terrible. Nobody nobody want not to see the daylight again. Hopefully,
Right.
but and of course there's nobody a better critic than your closest friends. They tell you exactly what they think,
Right.
and so you learn. You learn. I learned from that, and then just by accident, my grandmother sang in a choir, and she knew the composer William Matthias, the great
Yes.
composer of choral music. And he had just retired at that point, and he was kind of looking for something else to do. And so he took me on as a private student at the age of 9. So I'd go round to his house in Menai Bridge once a week and sit down overlooking the sea, and he'd teach me. And so that's how it all started for me.
Oh, extraordinary. Well, I too was a choir boy, and found that remarkable experience so moving that it set the course of my life as well. I was a choir boy at the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And so I know exactly what you're talking about, and indeed also wrote Juvenilia that is probably better left in the file cabinet. But uh, but indeed, that choral experience showed me a higher path that I relate to completely with you. So as you then continued to write, did you then go to university for composition and find yourself composing for student ensembles and then, but always choruses?
Yeah, no, but well, not to start with. There's a bit of everything. I mean, I started with choir, then I wanted to do everything else, you know. So I studied with William right up until his death in 1992, and it was him that suggested that I should go to the University of York, which is in this country at least. I'm not sure its reputation has travelled to the US, but was really well respected for composition
Mhm.
teaching at that point, and still is actually. And there was a wonderful professor there called Nicola Lefanu, who was a Harvard graduate actually, a student of Earl Kim's, you know, in Harvard. So and she went to Princeton as well. So she took me on as my tutor. So I worked with her for 6 years. I did my bachelor's and doctorate with her in composition and learned an enormous amount. And in between, I spent time at the Royal Danish Conservatoire in Copenhagen, working with Hans Abrahamsen, the great Danish composer. Yeah, and so I had really good teachers and had a great time. So I started branching out, writing, as you say, for student groups. And William Matthias said to me that you should learn an instrument, not just singing. Singing, of course, is fabulous, but you should learn an instrument. And he suggested learning the trombone. And I said, well, why the trombone? And he said, because as a trombone player, and he's absolutely right, you're right in the middle of the orchestra and you don't play that much. So you can hear what's going on. so,
That's a wonderful story.
so that's true. So I learned the trombone. So I played the trombone, I learned the cello, and then I learned percussion as well. I played timpani. So I did lots of different things, but singing, as you're right, singing was always there. But and studying in Denmark was amazing because I got really ensconced in the Scandinavian life, and everything just moves much slower in Scandinavia, and people think just much more deeper about things than in my country maybe. So it was a wonderful 2 years in Denmark. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, so I mean, I would love to chat more in general for probably for hours. However, I'd like to pull us back to the Stabat Mater that you wrote. Could you? So your inspiration was your grandparents, but would you please, give me a few more details? For instance, you mentioned the Episcopal Church, uh, and this is an extremely Catholic, ancient Catholic text. So what drew you to that, and how does it reflect your grandparents?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, the very high Anglican Church can be confused with the Catholic Church any day
True.
of the week, as you know. So the kind of tradition that I grew up in was very Catholic, even though it was Anglican. So I was always drawn to those Marian texts and things because we used to sing them. So my grandparents were very important. They're my mother's parents. So there's two sets of grandparents, of course, that are important because my and I. It, when I explain this, it'll make sense why I write the music that I do, I hope.
Uh-huh.
So, on my mother's side, they were Welsh and Scottish. On my father's side is Polish. And so I grew up with the Slavonic church as well.
Oh,
So, I think that explains why I use low basses all the time because I've just absorbed in that tradition. And so our name was Milarowski originally. When they came over here to escape the Nazis, they changed their name. So there's that side. So this is actually my mother's parents that I'm talking about now, and my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. I was very close to, and it was her that introduced me to William Matthias. She had a deep love of music. She was an amateur musician, always had music on, classical music and popular music. She was a country and western fan, if you can believe that. And we had, all of that great music. And so she fell ill with cancer, and she had cancer for about 7 years, pretty bad. And she just went through stuff, and I was quite reasonably young, and just seeing someone just gradually being eaten away with this disease over that period of time was awful. And so I was drawn to various texts, and the Stabat Mater was one of them that kept coming back to me. I read it to her in a lovely translation that I had. And so, even though the Stabat Mater, for those people that don't know, is actually the mournful mother was standing, so it's about Mary at the foot of the cross as her son is dying, the most excruciating death you can imagine, and the pain that she feels having to witness it. And she did witness it. She didn't move. She was one of the very few people that stayed the whole time until he was taken down from the cross, and she held him after his death. And as a parent, how that must be one of the worst things that can ever happen to any parent, isn't it? That, if not the worst thing you can imagine. And so this whole poem is about that feeling of helplessness against pain, or and this kind of inner strength that she finds from her faith in those moments. And so it spoke to me not just about the mother-son relationship, but any relationship where you are dealing with grief and illness, and there's nothing you can do about it except fall on your knees and pray. There's nothing else you can do. I remember C.S. Lewis saying quite famously, prayer doesn't change God, it changes me. And I think it's a fabulous way of thinking. And so I had a friend of mine, Father James, we were at school together. He was Catholic, he became a Catholic priest, and he now works quite high up in the Vatican. And at that point, I was telling him about it, and he said, "Well, we have the original text here in the archives at the Vatican." He said, "You can come and see it if you want." Um, and
Oh,
so he said, "I have to get permission from the papal." Anyway, so like this letter arrived from the papal household, the head of the papal household, Archbishop so and so, so and so, and it was permission to see this one thing. So I was to arrive at the Vatican archive at a certain time, and then a member of the Swiss Guard would take me down and blindfolded through these rooms. Yeah,
oh
it's just like Da Vinci Code. It's quite
my
just
gosh.
and you go right down into this room, and then you put in a room, and then there is the original. And of course, they don't know who wrote it. It's Pope Innocent III or Jacopone de Todi. Nobody really knows. But what struck me about it, and no one had ever written about it, is that when you see it laid out, it's actually the text is laid out like a cross.
Really?
Yeah, so you read it down, across, and down, in
Oh,
Latin, obviously. And I hadn't realised that. And so it struck me straight away that if the text is built on a cross, the music must be as well.
yeah.
Um, and so I can talk to you a bit more about what I did to create that later. But so those are things that drew me into that text. And sadly, my grandmother died before hearing it. But people write to me now saying she probably hears it all the time now.
Right. I think she does. Your piece was so compelling to me in light of what the world has just gone through with the global pandemic, people feeling uh, really having to confront the fragility of life and the loss of breath. And uh, suddenly our secure world was not the security that we thought we had. And Stabat Mater is, I see two witnesses. I see Mary witnessing Jesus on the cross, but I also see the narrator, the writer of the poem, who is witnessing Mary
Yeah,
in her sadness, and wishing to take it on with her, and ultimately asking for her to help intercede on the narrator's behalf
yeah,
to Jesus. And this whole process of finding or rediscovering grace in when all of what we took for granted has been shattered. I think that was such an important message for this time as we're coming out of COVID, that we need to rediscover that sense of peace, and the salve of faith is an important way to do that.
I completely agree, and I think the amazing truth about the Christian faith, whether you believe in it or not, I happen to believe in it, but even if you don't, is the amazing story that Christ and Mary and God know our suffering because they've been through it. And I think that's the worst, very worst kind of suffering. So they know we can't, whatever happens to us can't be worse than what's happened to them. So they kind
Absolutely.
of, we share that with them, and they share that with us. And I think that's the beauty of it, of that faith. I mean, it's almost the weirdest bit of it as well, but it kind of makes sense when you really start thinking about it. And so yes, I was drawn to all of those areas. And it just isn't a miraculous text as well. I mean, it's so beautiful. And well, yeah, you're right. The narrator, we maybe are the narrator with Mary at that moment. And of course, the other witness is Jesus himself. He's witnessing her love, which is amazing. Which why she's the only person apart from him that went to heaven. She never died. She went alive.
Yes,
The only person.
ascends.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
this is a little bit inside baseball, but which is an American expression about to over technical information that may not draw everybody in. But for me, one of the things that you used, one of the compositional tools that you used that drew me to it, and specifically about breath, was your use of commas between your phrases. And for our audience, oftentimes composers will write phrases, but the expectation is the metrical uh, consistency is to be maintained. And so people take breath as best they can from one phrase to the next. Uh, and yet your commas uh, prompted me to actually pace these phrases so that they're a reflection in and of themselves. We take a breath and then we start the next phrase. I don't do that all the time, but for especially in the beginning, when we are, there is a sense of stasis as this tableau is presented with Mary standing at the foot of the cross, and so we are dumbstruck, and that first phrase that is so powerful, the Mary weeping, standing at the foot of the cross, that needs to stop, and we need to take a breath and then go on. So we've been experimenting in rehearsal on how to pace that, and so I first of all, as a conductor, wanting to honor your intentions, is that what you intended, and so how did you come up with this idea?
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what I intended. And it's interesting because I've heard it done a number of different ways, but almost every conductor at least acknowledges those commas. I mean, they don't, so even they might not get it exactly how I want it, but they kind of acknowledge them, so which I think is lovely and brilliant. I think for me, there are two issues. The first is that notation, Western notation, as far as it goes, is good, but actually it's completely flawed in every level because doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you write and how long you take to write. You'll never get what it is that you're really trying to get across because there are problems with notation, as you know, I'm sure. So that's one of the first issues. So I try and find my own ways of doing that, and this seems to work. And basically tackling the opening movement of my Stabat Mater, the first movement, you've got to imagine Rachmaninoff Vespers. You have to imagine the Slavonic church tradition, which have these long phrases which stop, so you can take it in and then it starts again. So it's all about breathing and getting your body and your heartbeat to beat with the music, so that you actually it's chant like really. So that was my imagination. So you're absolutely right. You need to have those moments of just to take in what you've just experienced and then start the next bit. So that's exactly what I was imagining. And in this piece, I mean, I'm always amazed that it gets done so much because it's a really difficult piece. I
Is
mean, the hardest person it's for is the conductor. I mean, it's impossible to conduct this piece. I've done it myself and kind of thrown it out. It's really hard to conduct because there's so many fermatas happening all over the place, and I'm amazed people do it because for people listening at home or watching at home now, just to give them some ideas, is that I use all of the dynamic range. So you'll have four or five pianos, which is quiet, and then four or five fortissimos, and everything in between. I use the whole choir in multiple divisi, so three basses, three tenors, and things, a lot. And so that's really hard for choirs to take on. And so I'm amazed that they do. And actually, I've got to say, I've never heard a bad performance of it.
Oh, that's good.
People really go all out on it. I've tried to. Well, of course, there's a few we call in Britain stinker moments, which is the second movement particularly. So you have 7 minutes of singing a cappella, and then suddenly the orchestra or the piano or whichever version you're doing, comes in on the note that you've been trying to hold for 7 minutes. And of course, that's so hard. And I knew
Yeah.
what I was doing with that. That really tests a choir to keep the pitch. Um,
Well, we
yeah.
actually had our first rehearsal last night, and you'll be pleased to know that after performing that first movement for the first time with the orchestra, as the strings entered, it was dead on. So keep your fingers crossed for us this coming Sunday. That I what I found as a conductor is that um, there is such an organic quality to your music. As you say, the phrasing that is, that has been influenced by pieces like the Rachmaninoff Vespers, uh, uh, need to take the room into account.
You're absolutely right. Well, having grown up in a medieval cathedral, and spending a lot of my time in those buildings here in the UK and in France and other places, it's I'm struck by the time it takes for the sound to fill the space. And so with the Stabat Mater, I build that into the piece. So you have a chance of hearing it echo. And of course, as it echoes, it changes pitch and changes. And so so the room itself is a witness to the performance. And I do build it in. There's lots of silence in this piece. There's lots of moments for the room to add its voice. And I think doing it in such a beautiful cathedral as you're mentioning is exactly right for the piece. And it just adds another color to the tapestry of the composition. Yeah, it certainly does.
Absolutely.
It can't be done outside, for example. You can't perform this piece outside or in a dead room. It just loses everything. It has to have that conversation with the room.
Exactly. There needs to be a sense of resonance that builds within the space, I think. And while some audiophiles find that to be troubling, that they can't hear everything with clarity that they can on a CD or a recording that's been painstakingly balanced by some engineer. The reality is, I think composers take that into account as they are building a composition that needs that substance, that substantial resonance. We're thrilled to do this piece with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah,
It is one of those pieces that kind of gets under the skin, and stays with you for a while. And the interesting thing when I hear it now is people often come up to me in performances and stuff, or write to me. I get lots of letters about that piece, and many people remember people that they've lost or friends who've gone through really tough times, and it kind of gives some support. I mean, it's a piece that's performed now quite a lot at funerals, at funeral services,
yeah.
and at palliative care places as people are very ill, and to bring some comfort. Well, yeah.
Well, I have so many questions for you, Professor Mealor, but let me just ask you one more because I think that uh, as a composer you've thought about this kind of. I know I have as a conductor, as an artist, that I've heard it told when I program a piece like the Stabat Mater or Requiem. People say, "Why do you do that sad music? Why do you pick such lugubrious dirges to perform? Why not do happy music?" And my response is, none of those pieces is sad. There's always a transformative moment when it goes from the weeping and wailing to a joyous, arrival in paradise, or that transformation to a larger life outside of this existence. And so as a composer, do you take that into account? Yeah, you certainly bring your faith into that, but what do you say to people who ask you why you write so much sad music?
Yeah, they do ask me that, but I mean, I don't think of it as sad, to be honest. It's like as Gandalf says at the end of Lord of the Rings, don't be afraid to cry because not all tears are an evil. There's often great beauty in tears of happiness as well as sadness, and you can't. I mean, it's the old adage that you can't really experience full joy unless you've experienced pain because it doesn't mean anything. Light is impotent without darkness, so you have to have all of those things. And the great thing about the text of the Stabat Mater, and what I've try to do in the music is it is a journey from despair into everlasting life. And so as the piece reaches a point where it can't get any more intense, suddenly you're lifted out into the beauty of paradise in that very final movement, and the opening theme comes back, and your pain is now transformed into joy, and then all of the movements happen at the same time in the fourth movement. So if I don't know if you've seen that in the score, so you have the
Yes.
choir doing the first movement, and the strings are doing the second movement, and then something else is doing the third. So they all happen at the same time, three made one, and then it ends just simply with a very echoey amen. So actually, it's in the end, I think people come out of it thinking it's a joyous piece. And I think you can't have that. If all we ever do and all we ever write is kind of jolly, happy, clappy music, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if that's all you ever do, you're missing some of the most important aspects of human
Right.
existence.
But the
Um,
joy can't show through unless there are the shadows that give it contrast. And I think we humans are we're such complex, flawed creatures that, we have to examine the whole picture, not just the happy parts. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It means so much, and it's fascinating when people talk about love. The opposite of love isn't hate; it's indifference. And all of those different colors, hate and love, are so close, and they're diametrical and the same, and those emotions are all a part of it. And so, pain and happiness are often together in some strange way. In essence, it's at the heart of Christian teaching is the dichotomy. We live by dying. We win by losing. We become stronger by being weaker. There's the kind of opposites that are in all of the
yes.
Christian and Judaic teachings,
Yeah.
which I think is the irony of the beauty of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I look forward to bringing this personal insight that I've experienced and that the audience will experience to our performance on Sunday.